welcome back to another episode of I Wish I Was Taught That at School. My name is Evelyn Clark and I am one part of your hosting team. Together with my co-host Emily Wallace, we bring you an episode every week on something property, finance or mindset related that hopefully you weren't taught in the traditional schooling system but is still extremely relevant to your day-to-day lives. Now, you may have noticed that we are changing up the podcast a little bit this year, with Emily and I not recording an episode together every week, but instead segmenting the podcast a little bit more strategically in terms of what we do in our day-to-day business lives. So Emily, being a buyer's advocate, will be interviewing someone on property related topics, and myself, being a mortgage broker, will interview someone on finance related topics each week. Along with that, with the mindset piece, we will bring you a chalk talk, which is a little 5-minute bite-sized episode every Wednesday. And if we are fortunate enough to secure down a fantastic podcast guest who specializes in that mindset piece, we'll actually bring you a bonus episode to feature that. So you can certainly look out for those. Now, this week I sit down with Eve Smith from Umbrella Family Law. Eve is a collaborative family lawyer, which is slightly different to what you might have expected or know family law and just law in general to look like. So we dive into that a little bit more depth. The other thing that we talk about is binding financial agreements and what that actually looks like when you are separating from someone in terms of the finance aspect and the types of people that come together to ensure that that separation agreement is a win-win for both parties. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome, Eve Smith.
Hi, Evelyn. Thanks for inviting me along.
That's all right. Pleasure to have you. Now, Eve, you are, I suppose, cross-qualified, not only in Australia, but also back home for you in the UK, or where it used to be your home. And Umbrella Family Law has been going now for how many years?
It's just coming up for 2 years. So
Yeah.
I started my career in the UK and I qualified as an English family lawyer back in, goodness me, 15, 16 years ago, and practiced exclusively in family law. And then as a family, we decided to move to Australia 3 years ago. And being a family lawyer was probably the last thing on my mind at that time. But soon, I suppose, the draw of becoming a lawyer again and working and being financially independent, it was important to me. So then I started to look to cross-qualify, and now I'm dual qualified English and Australian family lawyer.
Yeah, and only recently as well.
Yes, it was a hard 18-month slog
Yeah.
because I obviously was establishing a law firm with my colleague Jane, and being a mum to 2 boys as well, and a wife. So it was really difficult then to go back to studying 20 years after having left university in the first place. But yes, I was admitted in December last year.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thanks.
How does it feel?
Deja vu.
Yeah.
Back to the grindstone, but actually doing a job that I love and I'm very passionate about. So I think it's really, really good now that I can give advice to those separating couples, as I have done for the last 15, 16 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, it's good to have you on. And we've spoken a lot about collaborative family law because essentially Umbrella is quite different to some of the more traditional, I suppose, family lawyers that we hear about.
That's correct. So like I said, having practiced family law for a number of years, I was a partner in a firm and worked in large departments. And I think the joy of the job went because there's an awful lot of pressure on couples to start the litigation process. And when you've got a separating couple, the last thing on their mind is wanting to be in court and having large legal bills and being in a position that they don't necessarily want to be in. And also as a mum too, when I had the children, I thought, well, actually, if I separate from my husband, what would I want our situation at home to be like? Would we want to be polarised and not able to sit around the table at our children's wedding in the future because we'd been through some long, drawn-out court battle? And also, people need as much money in their back pocket as they can when they're separating, and court's really expensive. So I decided to look to see if there was another way in which I could practice law. And the firm I worked for at the time was very much into alternative dispute resolution, looking at giving clients an option. So I then trained as a collaborative family lawyer. So what that means is I've probably got more tools in my toolbox than other family lawyers because I can give clients a choice. Litigation isn't the only resort. There are lots of other options available. So with collaborative law, we sit around a table together and we may bring in other professionals. It might be a child psychologist, it could be a financial planner, it could be an accountant. And we work as a team And it's a far more holistic approach to settling a dispute or a separation than a litigious one. And also what tends to happen is our clients come out of the process in an emotionally better place and with more money in their pockets to be able to start their new life. So it was when we set up Umbrella Family Law, Jane and I are both collaboratively trained and have been practicing it for a number of years. So we wanted to be able to give our clients a choice. We wanted to help them start their new life. And I suppose as well, we actually, we look after our clients. We might take them out for a coffee and just ask them, are you okay? Are you doing okay today? And it's not all about the billable hour for us. It's about looking after our clients.
Absolutely. It's so important. And at the end of the day, it's the experience in itself is hard enough for the client to then have to go through litigation or something that is more, as you say, it's more expensive. It's more emotionally taxing on them as well. It's much nicer to be able to help them and actually look after their best interests in that manner.
And I think we're not counsellors. We're not trained as well. My colleague Jane is actually. She's a trained counsellor before she did her law degree. But this week I had a client and her husband had just left her for another woman, but she thought their marriage was fine. So she's on a completely different path right now to him. So there's lots of bumps and hurdles, and when when one client's in a peak, the other's in a trough. So it's managing that emotion as well as trying to resolve arrangements for children, finances, what looks good, what do you need, whilst actually they're falling apart inside. And to place them in a courtroom on top of that is very, very difficult for people to manage, least to say the actual cost of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So in collaborative family law, do you still need a lawyer to represent both sides, or is it a case where you're supposed sitting around the table with both parties present?
So what we do is I would represent, let's say, the wife, and another collaborative lawyer would represent the husband. And so we come together as a team. So I'm essentially not there as her lawyer and the other side isn't there simply as his lawyer. We work together. So there's no us and them. Quite often we have a round table as well, so that doesn't polarize parties. We have a big whiteboard and lots of pens, and we do lots of drawings to say, well, actually, the granny sideboard is really important to me, but it might not be important to you. I'd like that. So we still very much take into account and are guided by legislation and what the courts would do. But I suppose those goalposts can be relaxed a little bit to take into account matters that are more emotive for the couple, rather than a judge who doesn't know them from Adam stipulating how their assets are to be divided. So there's a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, it's so good to hear. And so then how that translates into the actual separation process, can you explain to our listeners what a binding financial agreement is and how that process actually works?
Yes, of course. So when people do then come to an agreement, that agreement needs to be documented in some way, because if it's not, then it's not valid. So there are two different options parties can go down when they have reached an agreement. The first is a consent order. So if one party, let's say, isn't legally represented, then you can prepare a consent order, and that is sent to the court. So there's some judicial oversight on that agreement, and that's good if a party isn't represented, because it means if, let's say, there's an element of it that the court doesn't think is perhaps fair, they can return the document. So that's one option. The other option is a binding financial agreement, and that's where it is legally enforceable, but also both parties need to have legal advice upon it. So it documents the agreement reached. It covers things like what's to happen to the family home, what's to happen in terms of superannuations. It documents some liabilities that people have and who's to be responsible for those. It sets out what the assets are, the liabilities, and super balances. So it's a very substantial document. And because of that, you do need to have legal advice upon it. So if a lawyer prepares it, the other party then does need a lawyer involved as well, because a lawyer has to sign off on the agreement to say that I've advised this person, whether or not that person intends to take the advice or not. But certainly there needs to be some oversight there, because it's not going to court and there isn't a registrar or a judge overseeing it or having some input into it. So they cost about the same to prepare, both documents. It just very much depends upon the circumstances of the case. Usually if you have a binding financial agreement and there are children, you may well then have a consent order prepared which deals with the arrangements for the children. Let's say child maintenance wouldn't be included in a binding financial agreement. So then if there were to be payments, let's say for extracurricular activities, anything over and above a child support agency assessment, then you'd have another document called a binding child support agreement prepared, which would document the children. So I suppose in effect what I'm saying is that you don't bundle children and finances together because, you know, it's a very emotive subject. So children are dealt with in one document and finances are dealt with in another document.
Yeah, so when we're talking the binding financial agreement, we're more talking about the assets and the liabilities and how they're then divided up.
That's right. That's right. There is a little paragraph that says, you know, we've got 2 children and these are their dates of birth and they perhaps live with mom and spend time with dad, but that's as far as it goes in terms of financial support for children or being specific in terms of, you know, the children will spend Monday to Friday with mom or with dad, then you have another document to document that.
Yeah, absolutely. And how long do the clients have to actually prepare that and have it settled once they are deciding to separate?
Well, it's really how long's a piece of string.
Yeah.
The only pressure they have in terms of resolving finances is if they start the divorce process first. So in order to commence a divorce application, that you need to have been separated for 12 months here in Australia. So a lot of people, the more pressing matter is finances and, you know, who's going to pay the bill next week, or, you know, I've got a mortgage payment to make. Is he going to make the payment, or is the house going to be repossessed? So that's the pressure when people separate, is finances. So what we start off with is trying to get a feel for what the actual asset pool is and asking questions and asking for disclosure so that we can have sight of bank statements, tax returns, and get a feel for what there is and how that can be best divided. And it very much depends upon how cooperative the parties are as well, because if they work as a team, then great, we can make progress pretty quickly. If not, and it becomes rather taxing, then it can drag out. But there's no pressure to have to resolve something in, let's say, 4 months, 6 months, 12 months. We have clients where they do a lot of the groundwork themselves, and then they come to us and say, this is the agreement, this is what I'd like you to document, and then we can give them some advice and say, oh, you know, yes, that's a good settlement, or I think perhaps it's a bit lean here, when we can negotiate and speak to the other side. Or we can say, goodness me, that's a terrible agreement to you, don't sign any document, and they can say, actually, I'm happy with that. And as long as we've advised them of potentially what an outcome could be and dotted the I's and crossed all the T's, then if they want to accept that, then that's fine. So I suppose it very much depends upon how cooperative the parties are as to how quickly we can settle it. But certainly if a divorce has come through and is final, then parties only have 12 months after that to resolve finances, because after the 12-month period, you don't have let's say, an automatic right then to make an application to court if you haven't managed to negotiate and reach an agreement out of court.
Right.
So there's a time pressure if divorce comes first.
Right. Okay. So it depends on the order of things.
Yes.
As you say, how flexible both parties are and willing to sort of make those negotiations.
That's right. And again, it depends upon what stage of the journey each party are on, because if, let's say, a couple have simply grown apart, which happens, then they are probably more likely to be able to negotiate and be collaborative and more holistic in terms of a settlement and negotiating the terms of any agreement. If one party has left the relationship unexpectedly, let's say, then there's a lot more angst and anger and upset and emotion there, which can sometimes cloud the ability then to negotiate and put that to one side, to park it, but actually look at the bigger picture in terms of, well, how am I going to make ends meet? Yeah,
right. Okay. And so in terms of, I know that we've worked on clients together, or worked with clients, I should say, where they have, you know, come to you and they're looking at separating, and we are looking at that asset and liability division and working out how are they going to be able to afford that going past the actual settlement, and what does that position then look like for them as an end result, and whether or not they're, for example, going to be able to take on a mortgage that would then allow them to keep the house. So when you are assessing the position of a client and helping them to come to an agreement, you're obviously working with a lot of different parties. How important is that, and having those relationships for you?
Oh, it's essential, because at the end of the day, I'm a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a mortgage broker. I'm not a child psychologist. You know, I'm a mum, so I can you know, give a perspective from my home position. But certainly, it's very, very important to draw on the needs and the qualifications of other professionals. I think that's how at Umbrella Family Law we set ourselves apart, because we very much signpost our clients to other professionals. Because if they come to us and perhaps there's a few stages or they should address before coming to us, then we'll signpost them and say, look, don't incur costs with us right now. Go and see a financial planner. Try and work out what your budget is, and is a superannuation going to be relevant or necessary for you in terms of the financial settlement? Or if you're saying you want to keep the house, but do you know whether you can afford to keep the house?
Yeah.
Can you have the mortgage in your name, or how much can you buy the other party out with? Have you looked into that? And I don't know the answer to that. That's why it's very important that we have a network of people that we can refer our clients to for that critical and essential advice.
Yeah, it's absolutely essential. And it provides you, I suppose, with more of a holistic perspective for the client.
Well, that's right, because, I could contact you, Evelyn, and say, oh, I've got this client and she is looking to keep a house, and I could go through that whole application process with you, but then you're charging me, I'm charging the client, and is it not better that she comes to you direct and then develops a relationship with you that she knows you and trusts you?
Absolutely.
and is more cost effective for her? So that's our approach, is that we want to holistically help our clients, and we have a lot of empathy for them. So we are with them on that journey, and if we can resolve it as smoothly and quickly as possible for them, drawing on our resources, then so be it.
Absolutely. So where's next for Umbrella Family Law? Have you got anything exciting happening? Or?
We do. Yeah? So it's been a very busy 2 years. So we're coming up to our 2nd anniversary of Umbrella Family Law, which is very exciting. So we are looking to recruit another family lawyer.
Ooh.
But they need to be a certain type of character. I mean, obviously, we are collaborative family lawyers. We do have cases in court, but obviously that's a last resort for us. So we're looking for another team member who is very similar to Jane and I in their approach. And we have just secured a lease on premises too. So we're moving home. Yeah. So it's a very exciting time and anniversary for Umbrella Family Law.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, if they do perhaps want to chat to you, you're based in South Melbourne?
We are based in South Melbourne, but we have clients all across Melbourne. Also, I'm English and dual qualified, so I have a lot of clients as well who have assets back in the UK, particularly England and Wales. But obviously, if they do have assets outside of England and Wales, and I still have an awful lot of contacts back in the UK. So again, that's probably what sets us apart as well, is that I practiced in England for a number of years, so can give advice in relation to assets back in the UK as well.
And you can help expats, I suppose.
And there's plenty of them.
Yeah.
We all try and flee the UK and come to sunny Australia. So there's plenty of people here who
sunny
do have...
Sunny indeed in Melbourne, hey?
Well, yes, at least it's... I can see some blue sky today.
Yeah.
Although rain is forecast later, so we are going to have the 4 seasons in one day today.
Yeah, it's pretty typical.
Yes, again, we can do telephone attendances. A lot of our work is done online these days, and that's just the nature of the job, that people run busy lives, and we try and fit in very much around our clients. So we don't stick necessarily to office hours 9 to 5.
Yeah.
We adapt to our clients' needs.
And I suppose that's so beneficial for you running your own practice as well. You've got kids.
Well, that's right. It's a balance, isn't it? I have a busy life, clients have a busy life, and it's trying to find a common ground.
That's right.
And fit in. And sometimes 8 o'clock on a night is the best time to speak to a client.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's the same with us as mortgage brokers. If we only ran 9 to 5, we'd never be able to see our clients, because so many of them do work in a 9 to 5 role. And then asking them to come into the office within those hours is taking time out of their own personal lives. So being flexible in terms of hours and location, and like you say, running online or telephone calls with clients is so beneficial as well.
Yeah. It is, and it's having that freedom, isn't it? And not having to take a half-day annual leave to go see another professional. Who wants to do that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So do you help many clients interstate, or is it mainly overseas and Melbourne?
No, we do. We have Queensland. We have quite a few up in Queensland for some reason. I don't know why. But yes, we do. Not every day. We have a lot of clients who move interstate, and then obviously that raises questions in terms of who the children are going to live with and having permission from or consent from the other parent to the move. But somehow we do attract clients from Queensland.
There you go.
Maybe we need to venture further north, or have a little holiday up there would be good.
You could do 6 months here,
little
6
workshop.
months there. Yeah, absolutely. When do you recommend is a good time for someone to start speaking with you, if they are just even after some advice?
I think it's better to be armed with that information, because within this industry, there's so many people who've had a friend that's separated, or the next door neighbour has, or my girlfriend has, and everybody's willing to offer a little bit of advice. And all I can say is every case is different. So what your next door neighbour may have settled for or reached an agreement on isn't necessarily what you should, and every case is different. So we have clients who come to us who are perhaps thinking about separating. And I know that sounds terrible, that you would put some forethought into seeking legal advice, but I think it's better to do that, and then you can start to have those very productive conversations in saying, well, I've had some advice, this is perhaps what we need to start looking at, and gathering exercises, and actually have that in your mind rather than somebody present something to you and you don't know whether that's right or wrong. So as early as possible is my advice.
Yeah. And I suppose there's no real rule around it. There's also no real rule around the order in which clients do things.
No, not
We've
at all.
had cases where I've referred you a client after they've kind of gone through the process of I want to buy a house, and then the conversation does spark.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also been the other way, like we mentioned before, where clients are going through a separation and they need to look at that post-settlement situation and whether or not they can actually afford to continue their lifestyle as it is. Can they take on that debt? Can they keep the house, like we said before?
Yes, that's right. And I think as well, when everybody's living in the same house and there's about to be a separation, it's things like, can we actually afford to run two households, or can we afford to keep the family home and keep the children settled for a period of time? And if so, who's going to pay the mortgage?
Yeah.
Does that mortgage need to be changed to perhaps an interest only
Mm-hmm.
for a period of time, just to give us a little bit of breathing space? And I don't know whether that's possible, but you quite often do, Evelyn.
Yeah.
So that's where our connection comes to the fore.
Yeah. And lastly, do you have any advice for perhaps whether or not it's our listeners that are going through a bit of a tough time, or they're thinking about separating, or if it's a friend that they've had those conversations with about how to not necessarily refer them to a family lawyer, but how can they start those conversations and make them feel comfortable in actually seeking legal advice?
Well, that's a very good question, because a lot of people are put off by
Yeah.
lawyers. They think lawyers are going to cost an awful lot of money, that they've only got their own interests at heart. My advice would be seek advice from a collaborative family lawyer, because we have an awful lot of different tools in our toolbox, as I said earlier, and we can give you options. So it's far better to come and have a 1 hour, let's say, fixed fee consultation and make some notes and have those discussions, and then go away and think about it, because there's certainly no pressure that if you went to see a lawyer that you were then signed up and had to pay a fee for the next 6 months, let's say. I think it's far better to have that information to hand and know where you stand. And it may be we never see you again, and that's good if you decide to work things out. I think as well, marriage counselling.
Yep.
Going to see a marriage counsellor are worth their weight in gold, because something might be niggling you and bothering you, and it exacerbates. And actually, it can lead to a separation when perhaps it didn't need to, if you'd addressed the concern earlier on. So I always ask questions to clients like, is there a chance that you could get back together? Is this something that we can work on? And if so, let's make a referral to a marriage counsellor. And there are some fantastic counsellors, particularly here in Melbourne. So I think just seeking that advice early and not be afraid, and do a bit of a comparison on prices. Ring around and see who does a fixed fee.
Yeah.
Some lawyers operate completely different. Some are very corporate. Some aren't. Some are more relaxed. And I think it's finding the right fit for you and who you are comfortable with, because you're going to work with this lawyer for quite a long period of time. So you need to have that relationship with them. And if the first lawyer you meet isn't the one for you, then find another. Don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah, it's the same with any service. I mean, you're working in quite an emotional setting in some cases, and people need to be open and honest with you and need to feel comfortable in order to actually become vulnerable and have those conversations.
Well, that's right. A lot of our clients, I'm going to say women particularly, they've perhaps been the stay-at-home mum, perhaps don't have a large social network, their children have grown up, they haven't worked per se, and then they find themselves in a separation and they don't have anybody to talk to. So a lot of the time, we can be talking to a client, and like I said earlier, it's a bit more like a counselling session. They'll ring us up, they're angry, they'll ring us up crying, they'll ring us up on a good day and everything will be great. But I think it's having that connection and having that relationship.
Having someone that they can rely on and trust.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, Eve. That's very insightful. I'm sure our listeners, particularly if they are going through, as we say, a tough time in their family, or if they know someone that has, will get a lot of benefit from this in understanding the different types of family law that is available to them, and not being afraid to pick up the phone and ask some questions and seek advice, whether it is from someone like yourself, whether it's the financial planner, the accountant, the mortgage broker that they need to speak to or a marriage counsellor. I'm sure that we've hopefully helped out some people in that sense. So how can people get in contact with you directly if they do want to seek some advice?
Okay, so we have a website, which is www.umbrellafamilylaw.com.au. We do have a link on there that people can fill in some background information and request appointments. But obviously, to be a warmer connection, then they can contact us via my email address, which is eve@umbrellafamilylaw.com.au, or on our landline, which is 0399232020.
Very good. I'm glad you know it.
It's taken 2 years to get to that stage.
Yeah, that's right. That's funny. Very good. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Eve. We've now come to a segment called You've Been Schooled.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is a segment for our listeners that perhaps don't know, is where I will tell you a random fact that hopefully you and our listeners haven't heard of before, and will school you.
Oh dear. Okay.
It's a bit of a weird one, Eve.
Okay.
Since you are originally not from Australia, I thought we'd go with a bit of a global fact. So in Switzerland, it's actually illegal to own only one guinea pig.
Is that right?
Well, Google says it's right, so it must be.
That would be lonely if it didn't have a friend.
Well, that's exactly what it says. It says that they're social animals and they're considered victims of abuse if they're left alone.
Victims of abuse.
There you go.
Wow.
So a bit of
trivia.
legal trivia for our family lawyer.
Goodness me, well, my son's after a guinea pig, so perhaps we need to implement that at home.
Yeah, well, they're going to need to get one each, aren't they? Very good. Well, thank you again for coming on, Eve.
Thanks for having me.
We really look forward to doing more work together, because we obviously so much believe in what you do as a collaborative family lawyer. And thank you again for our listeners for tuning in this week. We look forward to bringing you another episode next week, which will be hosted by my co-host, Emily Wallace, and our Chalk Talks, which come out on a Wednesday evening for you to listen to as well.